Hello and welcome back to my channel. In the last video we studied about the data collection, and in this video we are going to study about the tools of data collection. So let's get started. In this video we are going to talk about the tools of data collection. In the last video, we talked about the data collection, what is data collection, and the sources of data collection. As we know that the data collection is the process of gathering information from different sources about the topic that is under research. And we use different tools for the collection of data. What are those tools? Those tools refer to the devices, to the instruments that are used to collect the data, such as paper questionnaires or computer assisted interviewing systems, case studies, checklists, interviews, observations, sometimes and surveys or questionnaires. These are all the tools that are used to collect the data. There are a lot of tools of data collection, but the tools that we are going to discuss in this video are interview schedule, questionnaires, and observation. First of all, I would like to tell you about interview schedule. We all know about interviews. Interviews are performed whereby there is a one-to-one conversation between the researcher and the respondent. And the interview schedule is basically a series of questions that are to be asked in an interview. This is called as interview schedule. Interview is a direct communication between the researcher and the respondent about a subject that is to be researched upon. There is a subject about which the researcher and the respondent indulge themselves to talk about. And this conversation or this communication is for the purpose of collecting the data that is to be worked upon, that is to be analyzed in the future for gathering the results. And the series of questions that are to be asked by the researcher to the respondent during the conversation, whether that be the telephonic conversation, whether that be the video call conversation, or whether that be the personal conversation, direct or one-to-one conversation. The questions that are supposed to be asked by the researcher to the respondent. Structured interview schedules are those which are completely structured, in which the researcher has already kept all the questions and he strictly follows the interview schedule that is structured. The questions that has already been written over there, the researcher is bound to ask all those questions and is bound to follow all the instructions that have already been structured and are written over onto the in the interview schedule. Semi-structured, this is somewhat structured and somewhat unstructured, or lies in between the structured and the unstructured ones, because it is somewhat structured and it is somewhat flexible, because during conversation the researcher may decide to change his question to some extent. So this kind of liberty is included in the semi-structured one. Non-directive, it means that the researcher and the respondent have or the participant have a free talk on an issue, a free discussion on an issue, and during that discussion, during that conversation or free talk, or during that free discussion, the researcher note down the things that he is looking for in order to collect the data for his research. Focused, this one is complete talk or in-depth talk on an issue. For example, if somebody talks about media, so this would be a completely focused discussion on the topic of media, or if it is an educational topic, the discussion would be completely focused on the educational topic. How to conduct an interview? Interview schedule should be as per objectives. And all the questions should be in accordance to the objectives of the research. Planning of time, duration, place, and mode of recording. All these things should be pre structured and informed to the respondent so as it becomes easier for him to find the time and to be available for the researcher. Follow all the formalities. For they should follow a good code of conduct. They should follow all the formalities of saying hi's and goodbyes, and of meeting that person in a well behaved manner. These are all the formalities, and the researcher and the participant should follow all these formalities. Use of appropriate language. Now, this is very important. The researcher should use the kind of a language which could not offend the respondent. Positive body language, there should be no negative connotations, there should be no negative interruptions, intrusions between the conversation. Directing the interview. The researcher should direct the interview in an appropriate way. It means that he should provide the respondent with the journal or the specific instructions so that the respondent may not feel somewhat undirected in any way. Questioning, proper stress and tone, use of sub questions if required. So there should be a proper stress. The researcher should lay stress upon what he actually wants to derive out of the conversation. So he should lay stress upon what he intends to ask to the respondent, and his tone should be in a balanced manner. Limitations. What are the limitations of the interview schedule? Hesitation to express. Sometimes there is the hesitation on the part of respondent to express completely. Vagueness. Vagueness occurs when there is sort of ambiguousness in the conversation and the respondent is unable to answer or is unable to understand what the researcher wants to derive out of the conversation, or what the researcher wants him to respond. Time restrictions. So the time is somewhat limited. It requires a lot of time from both the part of the researcher and on the part of the respondent. A greater amount of time is required. Less time for thinking. Respondent is provided with less time for subjectivity. So this kind of interview is subjective and it requires subjectivity from the respondent. Researchers' influence. Interviews may have this limitation that the respondent are influenced by the opinions of researcher. So this kind of bias should be avoided. Consciousness and manipulated, polished, sophisticated, socially accepted responses may be preferred. So this is also a limitation that sometimes the environment is such manipulated by the researcher or by the persons who are surrounding that conversation that the respondent may become prone to answer the polished and sophisticated, socially acceptable responses. Questionnaires. Now we are going to talk about the questionnaire, and we studied in the last video that there are two kinds of questionnaire in journal: open-ended questionnaire and the close-ended questionnaire. So what are the questionnaires? The series of questions that are to be asked in the written form from the respondent, and he is required to respond what he or she thinks about a particular issue. It's a sort of an indirect interview, and it is widely used tool. Come across a lot of examples in your daily life, and you are provided with a kind of a questionnaire survey where, in fact, when you scroll different videos on the YouTube, what you see is that you are provided with a lot of questionnaire surveys that you prefer this brand or that brand. This is a kind of a survey or a questionnaire is provided to you, whereby you are asked to respond in a respective manner, the way you think about different products, the way you think about different social issues. A questionnaire may help you gathering the data in a more reliable manner collecting the data in a more quantifiable kind. When to use? When you are supposed to do an objective research, when you are supposed to research upon something in an objective manner, so this is a very efficient tool. Factual data required is gathered from the questionnaire is basically a factual data and is based upon the facts and figures. Large sample, it can deal with large sample, it can deal with large population. Minimum cost and time, of course it requires minimum time because you can fill a questionnaire survey in no time. I mean, in 4 to 5 minutes you can complete a questionnaire survey. And minimum cost is required because you can email the questionnaire to the respondent also. Crossing geographical limitations, it has no geographical boundaries. You can directly email, or you can post a questionnaire to the respondent, and it does not follow any geographical boundaries. Types, we studied this briefly in the last video. Now we are not going to discuss it in a detailed way because open, closed, and mixed open-ended questions are asked in a questionnaire. This kind of questionnaire is called as open-ended, and closed-ended questionnaire in which the respondent is only asked to answer in a yes or no, or in a very straightforward manner. So this is, or he has to choose among different options, one among different options. This kind of questionnaires are called as closed-ended questionnaire, and mixed, which contains both open and closed-ended questionnaires. Now the live questionnaires is when the respondent or when the researcher thrusts the questionnaire into the hands of the respondent, and he's waiting for him to give that questionnaire back to the researcher. Distance, when you post, or when you post a document or questionnaire to the respondent. Email and web based, it means when there are different portals, there are different websites where the questionnaires are generated, and the links to those websites or those forums are sent to you, and you are asked to fill those questionnaires. Development of questionnaires. Objectives, the questions of the questionnaire should be in accordance with the objectives of your study. Content analysis, combination of types of questions. There should be a combination of different types of questions. For example, there should be rating scales, there should be checklist, or there should be sentence completion, there should be multiple choice questions. So a combination is always a better option. Sequence of questions should be kept in mind. There should be a proper sequence. Statistical techniques or statistical language should be used in analyzing the questionnaire. Questions should be clear, correct, to the point, appropriate, and some journal and specific instructions should be provided by the researcher to the respondent. Should be a proper appointment taken beforehand. The researcher should take the respondent into confidence. Journal instructions and specific instructions should be provided to the respondent. Tackling queries should be there. Postage and the formalities should be kept in mind. What are the advantages of questionnaire? Asked to research upon an issue that requires objective scrutiny, questionnaire is very much effective. Questionnaires provide respondents with the freedom to think freely, flexible, and the respondent has much enough time to think about things, and he's provided with ample time. Free to answer, he's free to answer, and he's not affected by the biasness of the researcher, or biasness of any person that surrounds him. Limitations of questionnaire, difficult to analyze, they are actually somewhat difficult to code. Environmental effects, collection is a challenge because some of the times when you physically provides the questionnaire to the respondent, it becomes somewhat difficult for you to collect back that document personally. Ambiguous, they could be ambiguous when there is no instruction provided, but a good questionnaire would never be ambiguous to the respondent. Of a good questionnaire, What are the external qualities? There should be instructions, proper instructions regarding every question or every section of question. And primary information should be handed over to the respondent. Font size, font style and type should be very formal. Grammar should be kept into consideration. Quality, color and size of paper should be very appropriate. Proper space for response and postage should be kept in mind. Internal clarity and simplicity of questions. Now the question should be asked in a very simple manner. Simple language should be used so as it may not become for the respondent to understand or to grasp up what the writer, what the researcher actually wants to say. Validity and reliability as per age of subjects. Division as per objectives. Objectives should be kept in mind and there should be a proper sequence. Pilot study should be performed. We know that interview schedules or interviews are very real and very live, so there is a direct communication between the respondent and the researcher, and it is more prone to subjectivity and it is more useful for the illiterate people, and it gathers more subjective information from the respondent. More time per subject can be given to each subject, and the variety of data from a person is also very different when we gather the information from through the interviews instead of gathering the information through the questionnaire, because the respondent can clarify what he actually wants to say and why he choose to give this kind of opinion. And it is not always easy to analyze, and it is somewhat flexible because the researcher can in any time change what he further wants to derive out of the discussion or what he further wants to talk about on a subject. And there is a one-to-one interaction, so this is a very positive point. And the researcher notes the responses, not only the responses but the expressions and the body language of the respondent is also put down on a paper by the researcher. And the questionnaire is on time of subject. It is an indirect interview, but it is widely used. It is more objective, more time for thinking and less subjectivity is involved. Useful for subjects, teachers and students. It collects the factual data and it is a formal way of collecting the data. It is comparatively easier, less time is required, it is rigid, and one to many reactions. Observation is a process of gathering information by actively observing a phenomenon. That could be a social phenomena, that could be a scientific phenomena, but the process of gathering information by observing any kind of phenomena is called as observation. Types of observation. It is of two types: overt and covert. Overt, as the name tells us, is open, unconcealed. Overt observation is where those being observed are aware of the fact. The researcher may still be the participant in the activity being observed, that is called as overt participant observation, or might play no part and simply observe. Overt non-participant observation. Covert means concealed and hidden. Covert observation is a particular type of participant observation in which the identity of the researcher, the nature of the research project, and the fact that the participants are being observed are concealed from those who are being observed or who are being studied. It means that the respondents or the participant or the community that is being observed is basically completely unaware of the fact that they are being observed, that they are being watched by the researcher. And there is another type that is called as participant and non-participant. Participant observation is a qualitative research method in which the researcher studies a group not only by observing the group but also by being a part of that group, also by participating in the activities of the group. Non-participant. It means that if the researcher is being a part of the community that is being observed, this kind would be called as participant observation. And if the observer is, or if the researcher is not being the part of the community that is under study, this kind will be called as non-participant observation. Precautions in observation. Appropriate observation tools should be used. Field notes should be taken. It means that the researcher should write down all the important things that he has observed. He should make the field notes that would help him to further conclude his results. Informal approach should be employed instead of the formal approach. Building rapport is very important. The researcher should build a rapport with the other participants of the observational community. What to observe? It means that the objectives of the observer, of the researcher, should be kept in mind all the time. Use of audio and visual aids actually help him to take a record of what he has studied or what he has observed in the whole period. Advantages. Natural responses are gathered, real time collection of the data. All round data is collected. The data that is collected is first hand, self experience is gathered, and the understanding of the subject in a more valuable manner. Limitations. Subjectivity of the researcher may be involved because his life experiences, his background, his opinions, and events of his past life may intrude in evaluation of the data while observing. Temporary form of data is acquired if the data is not recorded by using the audio and visual aids, or if the field notes are not collected, the data may become lost. So it is very important to keep them at hand. Difficult to analyze the data. This kind of data is difficult to code, so this kind of data is difficult to analyze. It's time consumable, and there are some practical difficulties involved. So this was all about today's video. We studied the tools of data collection. I hope you like the video. Please do not forget to subscribe the channel and hit the like button if you like the video.